for Junction Reads. This is our second last event of the season, and I have said this in a number of posts. I'm super sad that the season is over, but also kind of excited to get into the summer and joyful reading and all that kind of stuff like everyone else. I am thrilled to welcome Brooke Lockyer to Junction Reads. She is here with her debut novel, BURR, from Nightwood Editions and Harbor Publishing. I connected so much with this book on so many levels, and I've got a bunch of very different questions that I'm excited to get into with Brooke. Before we get started, I'm going to acknowledge where Brooke, Kaylee, and I are joining you from. We are in Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wyandot, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabeg, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. It is still home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. Brooke Lockyer, welcome to Junction Reads. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming today. It's great to see you.
That's good. Before we get into your reading and I share a little bit more about you in this novel, I would love to know what you're reading right now. If you have books and other stuff that you'd love to share with everybody.
Sure. Yeah, I have a big, you can see my bookshelf exploding behind me and there's more than all over my house. This was the last book that I really resonated with me, Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. I read it while I had COVID, and it was just a fever dream on top of that. It was like I was alone, I was isolating, and I read it in 2 days. And I just think it's really incredible how she creates like her whole own mythology and fairy tale world. And she's so imaginative. She's like a really excellent writer working today. And I have some other books too that are favorites, and that I think had some influence when I was writing BURR. This is one of my favorite books. We have always lived in the castle, Shirley Jackson. It's a novella. I really love novellas. I think they're so taut and intense. And I want to write one someday. I just, every single line is just beautiful and perfect, and I just think she's such a genius. So I highly recommend this if you haven't read it. And some other books that I love. This was one that helped me figure out the structure of BURR. One of my mentors, Catherine Bush, recommended it to me. It's got lots of sections from different points of view, including some narrated by lichen and beavers.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of wild that way. And it's in a town as well. And there's like an eruption of violence at the end. Anyway, she's a gorgeous and really interesting writer. What else? And another writer I really love, who's a Toronto writer, is Claudia Day. And also has sort of a quest to find a father. And she has these sort of flights of fancy as well. In one section, suddenly the narrator and her sister double in age overnight, and it just rolls with it and keeps going. And her other novel, Heartbreaker, is really incredible too. And one of the sections is from the point of view of a dog. And it's, I just think she's so exciting. So yeah, those are some favorites. I'll just do two more. My friend Laura Clark wrote this really wonderful poetry collection, Decline of the Animal Kingdom. And she's working on a novel right now. And I just love everything that she does. She's so funny, and there's and profound, and like no BS at all.
Nice.
Also about our kind of strange relationship with nature and animals. So I highly recommend that. And I have to I mentioned it in my book too. I just love this book, Bear, which is a Canadian classic, about a woman having a romantic relationship with a bear. And but it's also quite slim and funny and moving and quite strange, deeply strange. And I love that it was won so much acclaim too. Like I love that this book was celebrated because it's very highly odd,
Yeah.
effective.
Nice. I love that. And I know I read an interview, I can't remember if it was I can't remember. I'm horrible at remembering stuff where I read it, where you talk about the novella and how much you love the form. I also love it too. I wish that I could just write novellas. That would be the ideal world. Thank you so much for sharing those, everybody. If you want to add those to your TBR pile, Kaylee's going to put them in the chat in a minute. But before we get to hear Brooke read from BURR, I am going to share your biography with everybody, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Brooke Lockyer holds a BA from Barnard College and an MA in English in the field of creative writing from the University of Toronto. She was winner of the 2009 Hart House Literary Contest and a co-recipient of both the Peter S. Prescott and the Lenore Marshall Bernard Prizes for Prose. Her work has been published in Toronto Life, Carte Blanche, the Hart House Review, Whitewall Review, and Geist. Born in southwestern Ontario, she's lived in rural Japan, New York City, Bristol, and the Mojave Desert. Lockyer lives in Toronto with her family, and BURR is her first book. You can find out more about Brooke and little tidbits of her short fiction on her website, brookelockyer.com. This is the best part of the reading, discovering what part you have chosen to read from. I'm thrilled.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is the book, the beautiful cover by Angela Yen. As Allison mentioned, it's out with Nightwood Editions. And the book is composed of really short chapters from alternating point of view, different point of views, primarily 13-year-old Jane, who's recently lost her father, her mother, Meredith, who retreats into wildness, Ernest Leopold, who's like an older kind of outcast in the town, who is also grieving the death of his little sister, which happened a long time ago. And also, these points of views are sometimes interrupted by sections narrated from the town itself. So I'm going to read a few. Unlike unassuming Paris or the nearby village of Dublin, BURR lives up to its name. The prickly fruit is everywhere in this flat southwestern Ontario town, clinging to socks and sleeves and hair. Dogs' tails wag low and heavy. Cats flatten their ears as they bite at the spikes caught in their fur, trying not to pierce their tongues. As in all towns on the edge of wildness, nature intrudes in small and disruptive ways. Snails devour gardens, trailing slime. Residents pour beer into vats for snails to drown in, or remove their shells and saute them in butter if they're feeling cosmopolitan. Escargots, they announce, sprinkling guest plates with parsley and tucking Eiffel Tower cocktail napkins underneath. In BURR, everyone pronounces the T in escargot, even the ones who know better, not wanting to seem pretentious. If you drove down Main Street with its mix of gingerbread trimmed Victorians, bungalows, rambling farmhouses, and simple storefronts, you might think there was nothing special about BURR, nothing much to differentiate it from the other villages and towns dotting the periphery of London, except that the people of BURR have chosen to live here. They are proud of this choice and keep scrupulous watch over everyone else seeking a quiet life. The people of BURR believe it best not to speak of unseemly matters. They try not to talk about that night in 1880 when a vigilante mob murdered a troublesome family with spades and picks and fire, dousing the homestead with oil and cheering as it burned. That's long gone, they say now, if pressed, waving their hands dismissively. It's a nice, peaceful town. In BURR, there's Oxbow Elementary School and Medway High School and St. John's Church and Pete's Butcher Shop and BURR Food Mart and Dee Dee's Diner and the Flour Mill and Max's Variety and an Esso and a library and a cemetery where a young girl lies face down in the soil and dreams of being buried. I'm going to take you to that girl. That's Jane, who's 13 and has just lost her father. Salesmen knock on her door sometimes and ask where my dad is. They want to speak to him, the man of the house. Usually they're selling God and salvation, Jehovah's Witnesses with fervent faces and ill-fitting suits, pressing doomsday pamphlets into my hands. This morning, while mom is still sleeping, it's a Conservative Party campaigner. I dig my jagged fingernails into my palms and say, he's not here. We have a conversation about when he might be back, how he might be reached, and what he does for a living. I'm only partly punishing him for being nosy and too sexist to ask for mom. Eventually, I say Dad is underground, and the campaigner's eyes widen, picturing Dad as a political dissident in a foreign land or a miner with coal-smudged cheeks. Like in the dirt, I elaborate. A gardener? He asks, confused. I imagine my father turning from green to blue to gray, coffin flies laying eggs in his body, his abdomen blooming with mushrooms, golden moths feasting on his hair, his body seeping through the casket, the soil around him darkening, becoming nutrient rich. Kind of, I say. The steak man came by once too, his van filled with different cuts of meat. Dad bought some T-bones from him last year, but they were too tough to chew. I looked him in the eye and told him mom was resting and my father was dead. I kept my tone even, matter of fact, but it didn't matter. Like everyone else, he attempted to comfort me, recalling something he read on a Hallmark condolence card rack. He's watching over me. He's in my heart. I imagine my heart with Dad shrunk inside of it. Was he running his hands along the chamber walls as we spoke, feeling the ventricles for signs of vulnerability, double checking the valves, scouring plaque from my arteries, breathing into my blood? The steak man said Dad's spirit will always be with me, but sometimes I don't know where he is. Sometimes I don't feel him at all. In 100 years, his bones will have turned to dust. There will just be his teeth and some grave wax, the waistband of his briefs, the nylon seams of his Argyle socks. I'm going to read a section from Ernest next. I'm reading it. I think my sister Chrissy might be here, and I know she likes this chapter. So anyway, he's the older town outcast who's been kind of unmoored since the death of his little sister Evelyn. Ernest disappeared once. He was at his 6th extended stay at the Meadowbrook Center when it happened. His fingers vanished first over dinner. He speared 3 peas before his fork clattered to the floor. He didn't remember letting go. When he opened his mouth to apologize, he found his tongue and lips had left him too. He stood and realized he couldn't see his legs or his toes. By the time he reached the end of the corridor, he was sure no one could see him at all. He drifted behind the watchman, pulling out his cigarettes, and followed him out the hospital doors. Ernest floated to a nearby park, pausing under a spindly tree. His heart twirled. He hadn't lost that. He counted the stars and listened to the crickets rub their legs together in the dark. He reached downtown London when day broke and fell asleep on Richmond Street, the pumps of secretaries and loafers of men strolling through him like he wasn't there. A goth wearing a black Victorian dress stood where Ernest's body ought to be and powdered her face. He peered into the windows of coffee shops and record stores and bakeries and libraries and hardware stores and restaurants and clothing shops. He floated around snooty ladies and their little dogs. They tangled their leashes, barking wildly into the bright air. By the late afternoon, he was sick of the city, of its rotten garbage and hurried heels. He slipped into the passenger seat of a convertible heading north. The silver-haired driver hummed along to Mercy, Mercy Me, gloved hands guiding the car from paved streets to gravel roads as dusk settled all around them. When she turned onto Main Street, Ernest rose from his seat and flew to the ground. He drifted through BURR's backyards and gardens, passing through swing sets and barbecues, rose bushes and rhubarb. He felt lonely. He missed his body, and he missed being seen. Behind a white slatted 2-story house at 71 Main, a young black-eyed girl pressed her nose against her bedroom window and stared at him. It would take him a couple of weeks to learn her name. Ernest gasped, felt his body return to him with a heavy, knock-kneed thud. After a moment, Jane turned from the pane. He stayed in her garden, sniffing the vegetables with their glistening skins as hunger gnawed at his stomach. Next time he'd return with his camera, feed her image gently through its teeth. He put a tomato in one pocket and a turnip in the other before heading off to the ramshackle estate that hadn't always felt like a home. I'm going to read part of, this is the last section. It's Ernest and Jane have run away to Toronto to attend a seance, hoping to connect with Henry, Jane's deceased father, and also Evelyn, Ernest's dead sister. And the seance is led by Alabaster the Great and Brenda, his assistant. In the black velvet air, I conjure Dad's face. I recite details in my head to bring him into focus. Big white teeth, the mischievous way he combed his fingers through his hair around balding men, the gold charm of 2 grappling wrestlers that he wore in a chain around his neck. Spirits, are you there? Cry Alabaster and Brenda, their voices echoing off of each other. The breeze picks up, tugging at my hair and sleeves. I wish we could see if any objects or people were levitating. Will we see the dead, softly glowing when they arrive? I crouch low in my chair and huddle with Ernest, pretending we're weathering something normal, like a storm. A female voice rises up, murmuring a spell. Ernest wraps his arms around me for extra protection. The energy shifts. The wind disappears. Ernest releases me, and we sit up straight in our seats. Then, a rapping, 10 sharp staccato beats. Contact, someone breathes. A presence, I can feel it, a gentle weight as though someone is resting their hands on me. I touch my shoulders, but find only collarbones and cold air. Bells ring and the maracas and tambourines shake and rattle. I blink. The raps quicken, ricocheting off the walls around us. A low moan, not quite human. Goose pimples break out on my skin. I'm suddenly terrified of the very thing I came here for, of Dad transformed into a spirit or a ghost. I fight the urge to run. Dad, are you there? The raps turn into a light patter, hands splashing water, then a cackle, a toddler's giggle. The breeze inside the house gathers force. Dad's not here yet, but he could be on his way, shimmying through dirt and worms, passing through towns and cities and walls to come to me. The wind howls in my ears, mingling with the child's babble. If another spirit can show up, why can't my father? I reach for Ernest, not sure if he's crying because the ghost kid is Evelyn or because it isn't. A couple of other people in the audience are sobbing too. The demented music approaches and recedes as if the musical instruments were orbiting the room above my head. I squeeze my eyes shut and wait for Dad, summoning him with all my might, light flickering inside my lids. The raps become slower, heavier, a dullness to them now, like bodies thrown around on gymnasium mats. Is that you, Dad? He took me to a wrestling practice at the University of Western Ontario once. We sat with his old coach, breathing in air that tasted like stinky feet. The wrestlers wore singlets that didn't cover their nipples and had embarrassing spandex bulges between their legs. I focused on their grimacing mouths and cauliflower ears instead. I smell the sweaty toes of the wrestlers now, hear the barefoot squeaks and grunts and panting breath. I gasp as the tambourine's rattle ascends above my head. A sharp gust of wind in my ear. Or is that a referee's whistle? Could it be Dad this time, grappling there on the mat? Bodies shifting in time and space. I lean forward and place my hands on the ground, ready to creep through the darkness to Dad. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so glad that you read from a number of different sections. I hate asking authors to do any particular reading, but I'm grateful that you did. I want to talk about structure later, but first, death and grief and all of the kind of after death experiences happen in this novel, and the wondering what's happening. Jane's there's so many scenes where Jane's thinking about what's happening to her dad in this moment, in his moment of death. But there has never been a scene in a novel or in anything I've ever read in my life that has made me think about death in the way that that Tibetan funeral ritual scene made me think. I was so moved by the idea of the body, and I won't give a lot of it away, but the idea that a human body is not the person. And because of maybe a Catholic upbringing or whatever, I really, it made me stop to think exactly what happens after we die, not just physically, but spiritually. I want to talk to you about that Tibetan funeral ritual, where it came from, what sparked the idea, and how that plays into the theme of grief and the what happens after we die questions that exist in the novel.
Sure. Yeah, I have a dear friend, Rui Umezawa, who's a Japanese Canadian novelist, and I used to teach in the JET program, teaching English in Japan, and afterwards I help do interviews sometimes with him, and we chat in between. And I don't know how it came up. I think he was saying he always wanted to go to Tibet, and he told me about this yeah, about sky burials, and I was just, I was still, yeah, writing this book, and it just immediately resonated with me. And I did watch some, documentaries like on YouTube or whatever. But yeah, it is also a weird experience because it is like a British accent and it feels very like colonial gaze.
Mm.
So I did want to have that yeah, documentarian there as well, and also remove it again as being like an art experience. But yeah, I think for me, I did lose my father. I was a decade older than Jane is. And my dad chose to have, he wanted to be embalmed and to have an open casket. And I actually did find it very helpful for me. Like when I saw him there, I was very aware that this was no longer my dad, that my dad was gone from that body. And so, yeah, that was, yeah. And there's a scene in the book, and I think I did actually like touch his skin a little bit, and it's just, but it did help me kind of realize that, I can mourn the body, but yeah, he's gone. What made him him is no longer there. So yeah, that's something that, yeah, kind of changed my life, and also the way I've thought about death.
Yeah, and it's really the way that Meredith is thinking about it when she's watching it. She really is in herself questioning her relationship with Henry now that he's dead, and how she's treated his absence, and I found it very powerful. And in again, I'm sorry if this is an uncomfortable subject for you with the grief. I think the way that you were just talking about it is why it came alive in so many sections of the book and felt so emotional for me. And there's a scene between Jane and Ernest where Jane is talking to him about how she wishes she just had that last opportunity. He died so suddenly, she didn't have a chance to hear, or he didn't have a chance to say maybe what he wanted to say to her, what he would want to say to her if they were his last words. And Ernest says to Jane, do you think he was telling you this all along? Do you think that he was saying those words all along? And that again just made me pause and think about how in death we don't cling to what we had in life, but think about what we're missing now that they're gone. I want to talk to you about that scene between Jane and Ernest, and that just that powerful moment between them.
Mm. Yeah, um I think it is totally normal to miss someone's voice and want more moments, from them. But yeah, I think there's a realization for Jane that she knows him so well that she can imagine what he would say anyway, and that he probably did tell her things in the past, or she carries so much of him in her all the time that his voice is kind of inside her too. That it sometimes he may feel far away from her, but other times she might feel his presence very close. So the voice in that way continues on.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It reframed my whole perspective. And I don't know if you've probably thought about this as a parent, that whole, what would we do if we knew we were gonna die ahead of time? And that Oprah stuff where parents write letters to their kids to open on birthdays and holidays and all that kind of stuff. It really reframed that idea as perhaps something that diminishes the life, the relationship that we have in life.
Mm.
And Meredith's experience, so beautifully wrought, that she feels his absence. She's more not necessarily looking for a way to communicate, but just looking for a way to fill the space that was once there. But in so doing, ignores Jane. And again, you play with the idea of motherhood. Like, how can she be a good mother? She can't possibly be a good mother. She's ignored her child's grief. But then again, as a reader, I'm thinking, well, how can one attend to their own grief and to the grief of other people? Can you talk about the role that motherhood plays in this novel and how important it was to have Meredith's perspective?
Hmm. Yeah. I've always loved kind of portraits of imperfect women. And I feel like mothers are held to like this impossible ideal all the time. And I'm glad you felt that way about her, because I feel like it I think there's a lot of flashbacks for her of early motherhood, because that was another time when she felt she just couldn't meet the needs of this baby who just wanted more and more and more. And I think that, yeah, I think like you said, you know, she can't really be both parents for Jane when she's also feeling half of a person, but she's sort of expected to be two people. So I did want to show that, and I wanted to be sympathetic to that. And yeah, and I also wanted to explore fairy tales through her too, and to have her have that experience in the forest as this sort of magical respite for her and for the reader.
Yeah, I loved that. I mean, that definitely, with when you have a magical elements in fiction, there was, I think, probably 5 minutes where I thought, okay, is this real or is this a figment of her imagination? But I thought it was fantastic. And then when Henry's things start disappearing and the reader's left to imagine this world that she's building for her and Henry in the forest, I loved it. It was really imaginative and emotional too. When sorry, my questions are all out of order now, so I'm not.
Sorry.
That in the novel, I want to talk about secondary characters because there's a couple that are really important. But in the novel, there are two first kiss scenes, which are both very awkward in their own ways, without giving anything away to the reader. I wanted to talk to you about that, because the first kiss brilliantly doesn't talk to the ending at all. And the second first kiss should be absolutely disgusting, but it's not. It's really beautiful. And I want to talk to you about those two elements, those two relationships that you build in the novel between Jane and
There's the second one, the beach one.
no, the second one is Ernest.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it on a beach? I'm sorry if I.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, well, the scene with the friends at the beginning, I've been working on this novel for a long time and it's evolved a lot, but that was an older part. I always had that scene. Yeah, I'm trying to think now where exactly it came from, but yeah, I feel like there was just like a lot of talk about how to kiss someone when you're younger. And I remember with my friends, like, like sometimes they would show on like a stuffed animal or something, or just like
Yeah.
very child, but also, kind of creepy. Yeah, it's a coming of age novel as well as a gothic. And so I felt like there had to be um, sort of this evolution of from play into sort of an exploration of desire
Mhm.
forms. And yeah, I also don't want to give away what happens later, but I think Jane is trying to figure out who she is. And um, I was also, playing with, Freud a bit as well, with sort of the father figure too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'll say.
Yeah.
No.
No, good. I think it's hard when you have, and I will fully admit that my best friend growing up was a female cousin. We didn't do a lot of practicing, but we did a lot of those conversations where, how are you the only person in the world who I feel loves me? How are
Yeah.
you going to make sure that I'm going to be loved by other human beings? And I think that's where it was from. And I felt that between Annie and Jane in the novel, that the two of them, Annie just really wants the best for Jane, and Jane wants the best for Annie. And the other secondary character I thought was really interesting was Ruth, because she comes off, and again it was difficult because it's the 90s, and so you don't know if um she's smoking, and you don't it's hard to have that portraiture of a character from the 90s perspective be. But again, I thought Ruth was this beautifully connected and authentic secondary character that feeds the novel in a way. And I thought about her a lot at the end because I wanted to talk to you about secondary characters. I thought about her at the end, and the question I always have when these secondary characters take up space in a novel is, what would the novel be without them? And I think the novel would be less without Annie and Ruth, and even though, idiot teenagers in the town. When you thought of this, and you mentioned the short stories, an old idea, when you thought of this, how did those secondary characters come to you?
Hmm. Um, That's a great question. Yeah, Annie was there from the beginning, but she was kind of thin. Like initially, she sort of, um, I felt like she kind of disappeared halfway through in an early draft. And so that was something I did work on in the editing process. I wanted to care about her too and think about her journey and her perspective. And I think Jane, I think it is easy to be selfish in grief for anyone, and just being a teenager too. Like it's all about you. So I wanted to have another perspective, and who is pushing away who in these relationships, and who is projecting on who. So yeah, I did come back to her and thought about more like, where is she from? What's her family? Um, and that was really fun to do. And Ruth too, she used to be Helen. And then once I decided she was a Ruth, I got the voice more down.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, there is yeah, someone that I care about who is like loves to talk. And so once I was thinking about like someone who loves to switch topics, and yeah, that kind of came alive for me. And I also blended some other people I knew into that portrait. Also, I had a friend whose stepmother had these kind of pastel drawings of girls on a beach that were kind of like awful, but and kind of strange, but I felt like I'd seen them, at garage sales and growing up. And so I have those behind her in a scene. And the nicked kind of wooden dolls were something I remembered from my childhood. So I kind of used, I guess, with Ruth, like certain objects,
Mhm.
collector, and that kind of helped bring her to life for me, thinking about the things in her home, the table with the leg that's wooden, like bitten from dead dogs. That's a
Mhm.
table I have in my house. So yeah, I kind of I just used objects to bring her more into focus.
Yeah, I love that just changing her name completely brought her to life. That's a really good trick, I think, to work with characters who might be lying flat, to
Mhm.
change their name and see
I
who they
recommend.
become.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh yeah, she's Ruth. This is not what Ruth would say, and yeah, I recommend it.
Yeah, that's awesome. The other thing in one of the Ernest section that you read today, you talk about the photographs, the pictures that he takes, and photographs come into a lot of the sections throughout. And I want to talk to you about that because they are old photographs or dark photographs. I mean, they're always sort of gothic to me and have the potential to pick up the spirit of the people who are being photographed. And when I look at really old photographs, I often think about the elements of the person that exist still somehow in that image. So I want to talk to you about photographs and how they play a big part in BURR.
Yeah, thank you. I love them too, and I think they're another way they capture moments, they capture people's personality. Also, I just love that when you go to a photography exhibit, like how people can have a style, like the person taking the photo, you can tell, like the way they see the world is like, and you if you see a Diane Arbus, that's her
Mm,
shot. Even though someone else might have the same camera, their photo, what they capture in their eye is totally different. And I love that about photography. I also, when I was in high school, I really loved spending time in a dark room, and just the idea, like all the chemicals, and then seeing the image appear, on the sheet when
yeah,
you've done it correctly, if it worked or not, and what comes through. And it's so exciting, and it kind of is like almost like an act of conjuring, it almost feels like in that
mhm,
moment. And I feel like writing when it's going well is kind of like that too, like um, hearing a voice or having something you feel like an image appearing. And
yeah,
writing, this happens like 1% of the time, but when it's going well, I feel that feeling.
yeah. I love that. I love being alive
Mhm.
in the chemical solution and imagining that if you did it well, the person in the image could come more alive, I guess, or less alive, depending on how you took the photo.
And I wanted
We
Ernest to be a type of artist as well,
Yeah,
too. So yeah.
he is such a great character, and the BURR sections that speak to the judgment and horribleness of small, not just small town people, like all people, in seeing people that they can't see past. Again, talking about imagery, they can't see past what they see in front of them. And Ernest is such a great character. You talked earlier about the sections, and you mentioned before you're reading there are 4 different perspectives, um, maybe 6 if we want to talk about the whole novel, but 4 different perspectives. And I want to talk about when it was a short story, when you imagined it to be a short story, and when it became this bigger novel, bigger story, and your decision to choose the 4 perspectives, but also your decision to have Jane in first person and the rest of them in third person, sort of back a little bit more.
Sure, that's a great question. So I started with Jane in the first person. Um, the first person was sort of a natural mode for me always. I love the intimacy of it. I love like having like a strong voice coming through. Um, I love the age of like 13, 14. I feel like everyone is going through a transformation at that time. I love the mix of the
Mhm.
childlike and sort of the adult and the different awakenings happening. Um, and yeah, it was actually um, yeah, Rosemary Sullivan, who was a mentor when I did my master's, had brought this old, fragment, which was, the beginning of BURR. And she really encouraged me to try the third person. And I was a little, unsure, but I actually really loved it too. It kind of, the way you can zoom out and see more.
Mhm.
You can still have it from a character's perspective, but you can also mention things just outside. You kind of like thinking about photography, there's a different frame that you
Mhm.
can, and I also love that with the town's voice, can have a bit of a droll or kind of fairy tale or storybook quality to it too. So I felt like you can still play with tone in interesting ways in the third person. And I
Mhm.
just thought, why not? I'm just going to mix it and have a first person and then third person. And Jane too, I think for me, she is the main character. So I kept her in first person just for the reader to also have that intimacy kind of voice in their ear talking
And
to.
to feel that. She really does feel, even though, probably from a word count, she has just as much space as everybody, but she really does feel, she comes more alive. She really does feel like the main character.
That's great.
And before I ask you what you're working on right now, I'm just going to open it up to everybody. If you haven't read it, but the conversation that we've had right now, feel free to put a question in the chat. Kaylee will ask on your behalf. We're also going to have a raffle in a couple of minutes. So if you haven't read it, you might be able to win a copy. But I want to talk about what you're working on right now. I want to talk about we talked about novellas at the beginning, but I want to talk about your um, go-to story genre and what you're hoping to create next.
Thank you. Yeah, it might be a novella. I'm not sure if it's a novella or a novel yet. But I'm a mother, and my second daughter was born a pallbearer, which it means that she was born with her amniotic sac intact. Um, and I had a home birth for her, and the midwife was really excited. She said, "Oh, in England, where I'm from, one moment."
Okay.
In England, where I'm from, that's like a really good omen. She's never going to drown. She's so lucky.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh, great. And apparently in Victorian times, calls were dried up and sold to sailors for considerable sums. So I was feeling really good about that. And then I went on the internet and I read, oh, actually in Romania, pallbearers are thought to, like, they could turn into vampires unless you feed them their dried up caul by their 7th birthday.
Oh my God.
There's like pallbearer like forums, and yeah, anyway, I got kind of into this world, and I thought I'm gonna write something from the perspective of a very precocious pallbearer who's juggling these different prophecies, and it's going to follow her as she ages. She starts off like, and she has special powers, so she knows more. So yeah, I'm leaning more into genre with this one. It's dark, but it's kind of funny. I would say it's, yeah, maybe more, yeah, and there's some kind of vampire tropes too. So I'm still,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of maybe done about 50 pages, but it's pretty fun so far.
That is incredible. I can't wait to read that. I love because this goes into the conversation you and I were having earlier about kids becoming swimmers. So now I'm excited to, maybe I'll stay in officiating so that I can hang around for when she becomes a
Oh, that
competitive swimmer.
was
That's
great.
funny.
Yeah.
Um, Kaylee, do we have any questions?
We do, yeah. Our first question comes from Gail, and Gail asks, why the title BURR?
Ooh, good.
Hi, Mom. That's my mom.
That
See you there. Yeah, Bert, that's a great question. And I didn't plant this one, but I swear. But I question. Yeah, so growing up, I grew up outside of London. There was a town nearby called BURR, and I thought it was named after the spiky plant, like for like decades. And I always thought about it that way. But then I found out later it's actually spelled BIRR, and like clearly it's nothing to do with the plant. But I knew I wanted to write like from that region, but for it to be fictionalized. So I thought I'd keep the misspelling as sort of a signal to any reader from that area that, yeah, this is not historical or completely accurate. And I pulled things from elements from near where I grew up. I grew up near a town called Arva, which was, I found out later, a stop on the Underground Railroad. And some of the schools I mentioned were schools I went to. I just kept them because I like the names. And then also some elements from Lucan, which is the home of the Black Donnellys. I had kids at my school who were from Lucan and had some Donnellys there. So that story was always sort of like talked about and kind of hung over my childhood and adolescence growing up. So that was a big influence. So I kind of grabbed some like local lore from those areas, and then just also a lot of imagination. Like, yeah, the escargot thing is not real at all. But I do remember finding out that you're supposed to say Van Gogh instead of Van Gogh for the painter. And my sister, Chrissy, who's here, said, you can't say that. You'll sound so pretentious. So, I kept mispronouncing it. So I felt like something like that was like the worst thing that you could do in the 90s where I grew up, was to seem pretentious. That's where that detail came from.
But that is so true. And it's funny because you do, as I as a writer have that conflict, right? Am I going to say this correctly, or am I going to be a ponce and say it? Yeah, that's funny. I love that. And I love the comment, Chrissy. That's good. Any other questions, Keely?
Yeah, we have our next question is from Lizanne, and Lizanne asks, was it hard to research seances in the 90s? And an aside, she loved those scenes.
Thank you, Lizanne. I didn't find much really about seances in the 90s. So I ended up, like being really influenced by Victorian era. But I added like clap on, clap off lights to give it a bit of 90s vibe. But I'm also really influenced by the filmmaker Guy Madden, who's from Winnipeg, who has this amazing movie, My Winnipeg, and he creates his own mythologies. And he has he also will make now silent films and make them look really old timey. So I thought I'm just gonna rock with it and have it be old fashioned in that time, and have it kind of anachronistic too. So I guess my research was more in the Victorian era ones, and then I just placed it in the 90s.
It is very, and anyone here who was in Toronto in the 90s, it is very 90s Toronto. I feel like walking around as a young person in the 90s, there were like tarot card readings everywhere, and just like, and not just the places with the neon lights at tarot cards, but people just on the street, just luring you into to seances and readings and groups, like group conversations about death. So I thought it was great.
Oh, I did have, I was really into Ouija boards at the time, and I had a Rider-Waite tarot deck. So like that stuff I knew for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they were good. And I totally agree. They were fantastic scenes, all of them. Sorry, Kaylee.
No, all good. Our next question is, you mentioned some different elements like people, objects, images in your real life that informed your writing. Did anyone in your life read the book and see those things and recognize themselves? Or are they more things that are so personal to you that they aren't necessarily recognizable to others?
I mean, let's see. I could probably asking my family would be better for that one. But I know with my mom, she was very much like, oh, I want to read it when it's done. I don't want to put pressure on you either way. And the mother character is very, very different from my mom. My mom's a lot of fun. And if we retreated at all, it was more into like shopping or something than into the forest. But I think people who know me well would see certain things. My father was a wrestler, and I did plant those things almost like little seeds, like for myself to stay connected and to like, one, they're things that I know, but also just to make me feel like connected to the material, and to also just make it less generic as well. So I think it depends on the person, I guess, in the life, what they will see. And they might even see things that I didn't intentionally know were part of my life, you know? So I'm curious to have more of those conversations. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, especially writing from the area where you were born and having that kind of subconsciously narrating your own life in a way, right? Like having a lot of your own life and time feed into that. It was good.
Thank you.
Haley, one more question?
Yeah, we have one last question. It's from your brother-in-law. And he asked, was there an influence in your life that created the Ernest character?
Oh, no, I never knew. Um, I I would say I kind of took him more from like fairy tales that I loved. And I was thinking about, he's not Bluebeard, but I think Jane thinks he might be. And that was a story that I loved. And I don't know why I loved it. I don't know why, you know, it's so dark. And I mean, it's a story about forbidden knowledge and being punished, you know, for that as well, which is relevant to the story. But yeah, I just loved these scary fairy tales growing up. So I wanted him to appear that way. But no, I never knew anyone like him. There's, you know, I love doing photography. So there's some parts of him that are parts of me too, you know. But yeah, in a way, he's the character that I put like the most imagination into, which was fun. To have that. And he changed. He used to be more kind of predatory, but I didn't want to be in that point of view. And so I kind of realized at a certain point, you know, like I want to love him too. And I can make him who I want him to be, you know, and so I can have him so that he appears one way, but he's actually kind of pure in a way and kind, and he's a victim too. So that kind of transition really helped me continue the story.
Yeah,
And
he is such,
their connection to death.
yeah, he is such a beautiful character, and that in the important conversations we have to continue to have about mental health, I thought he's an important character in that conversation. So I appreciate that. Now the best part. We are going to raffle off. I think what we'll do, and I'm happy to argue this with everyone, but I think what we'll do is raffle off a copy here and a copy on social media. Kaylee, what do you think? Good. Okay, we'll do that. And that way, the more people share this video, then the more people who spread the word about this novel and this conversation will have a chance to win a copy too. So thank you in advance to Nightwood Editions for their donation of the 2 copies, but we'll raffle this one off. And if you win and you're related to Brooke, feel free to nominate somebody, and Nightwood Editions will send it directly to the name and address that you send to me. Kaylee?
That's the fun part about when family shows up, is they're like, I have an early copy, and I have a final copy, and I have an early draft on a Word doc, so that they can share it with their neighbors. Just fun. Our winner for today is Kate Guys. I'm sorry. The last names are always very difficult for me, but it's Gies.
There she is. Hi, Kate.
Hi. That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have a copy of it, but I've been telling with some of my friends about it, so I'm gonna give a copy to one of my friends.
Oh,
as well.
awesome.
Yeah.
So send me an email to junctionwrites@gmail.com, and Nightwood can send it to you. It's if you feel like you're going to end up mailing it to somebody, see if you can find out their mailing address, because postage is not cheap.
Okay, so I guess I could also suggest somebody that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can do either one. Nightwood can send it directly to you, and then you can just gift it to somebody, or you can send me their name and address, and Nightwood can send it to them directly.
Yay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brooke, for joining us with this incredible, emotional, dark, fun novel. It was, I really loved reading it, and I really loved sitting down and talking to you about it. I wish you all the best with the new novel. I hope that you or somebody writes a novel in the Niagara region that we talked about earlier, So Much Darkness, or Ridley,
Yeah.
the potential of a horrible murder at Ridley College is good.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We have one more reading / workshop / information session. Patricia Westerhoff is joining us next Sunday. She wrote a book about Canadian publishing and how to get published and how to submit and query and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a very writerly focused workshop conversation. So feel free to join us. You can find out more about our events and perhaps how it's going to play out next season at junctionreads.ca. Again, thank you, Brooke. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Allison and Kaylee and everyone for coming. This was really fun. And yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks. And thanks, Kaylee. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great Sunday. Bye.